Welcome back, squad. Today we're talking about fantasy stats you need to know and fantasy stats that I think are hogwash. Let's get rolling. So like I said, today we're hitting some fantasy football stats that I think are super important to know, and then some stats that I think just don't really matter at the end of the day. So the first and maybe most obvious fantasy stat that's important is snap share, right? You can't score fantasy points if you're on the bench. So make sure that your players are actually playing in the game. Seems kind of obvious, but you'd be surprised. The next fantasy stat you need to know, especially for wide receivers, is targets. The number one fantasy wide receiver in 2023 was CeeDee Lamb, and he led the league with 181 targets. The number two fantasy wide receiver was Tyreek Hill, and he finished third in targets last season. And the number five wide receiver, Amon-Ra St. Brown, finished third in targets at wide receiver. This can also benefit you for the upcoming year. I look at Garrett Wilson, who finished as wide receiver 26 last year, but he was top 5 in targets. I also like to look at fantasy points per game as an important statistic. Keenan Allen and Justin Jefferson both finished top 5 in average wide receiver points per game. Allen finished 8th at wide receiver and Jefferson finished 33rd, and both of those were due to injuries. So if they can stay healthy, which I mean, can anyone stay healthy? I don't know. But if they can, they're looking at top 5 potential. Now let's talk about some fantasy stats that I don't like, or at least ones that shouldn't matter when it comes to picking your players. For example, drops at the wide receiver and tight end position, I think do not matter at all. The number one leader in drops last year was Puka Nacua. He finished as wide receiver 4. The number one leader in drops last year was Puka Nacua. He finished as wide receiver 4. The number 2 leader in drops was Tyreek Hill, and he finished as wide receiver 2. Drops are a very fun statistic, but I wouldn't say they're really pertinent to fantasy information, so don't hold too much weight into those. Now this year the leader in interceptions thrown was Sam Howell, and that's a bit of an outlier in my mind. Because if you go one below him, the 2, 3, and 4 in order are Allen, Hurts, and Mahomes for most interceptions thrown. Allen finished as QB1, Hurts finished as QB2. Are interceptions annoying to a fantasy quarterback? Yes, of course, but should they factor into your decision? Not a ton. Another one that I don't love, especially in PPR, is yards per reception. The leader in yards per reception last year was George Pickens, followed by Brandon Ayuk, and then Amari Cooper, which doesn't sound bad on paper, but let's look a little bit deeper into it. Number 4 on that list is Noah Brown of the Houston Texans. Number 6 is goddamn Gabe Davis. We'll get there. We'll get there. Both Odell Beckham Jr. and Alec Pierce are inside the top 10, so a lot of these guys are having great yards per catch, obviously, but they're getting 3 catches a game. They're getting 2 catches a game, right? Nothing sexy, nothing appealing. I've said sexy like 4 times in these videos. Yards per reception is great for like a Josh Palmer, but Josh Palmer isn't going to put up the numbers that like Keenan Allen would on the same team. I guarantee you Keenan Allen is not on this list, but he finished as a top 10 wide receiver in 2023. And this one might be a little controversial, but I would argue that season-long overall finish does not matter as much as you think it does. I say the biggest reason for that is context matters, right? So CeeDee Lamb finished as a wide receiver 1. Keenan Allen finished as a wide receiver 8. I keep going to the Keenan Allen well. I don't know why that's like my go-to. CeeDee Lamb obviously played every game, was on top of the ball, did a really good job this year, and I don't want to discredit that at all. Keenan Allen played all but 4 games this year and was really good and could have probably fought for that number 1 title if he wasn't injured, if he didn't lose his quarterback, Could CeeDee Lamb finish as a wide receiver 1 again in 2024? Sure, possibly. Do I know that? Obviously not. Joe Flacco only played 5 games, but he finished as QB3 in average points per game. Devon Achane missed 6 games, but he finished as RB5 in average points per game. Rachaad White played every game this season, but he finished as RB10 in average fantasy points per game. I think obviously you want to have the number 1 overall scorer in every category. I'd say that's such a hard metric to predict. Thanks for staying to the end, you guys. We appreciate you. Check us out, Twitter, YouTube, website, all that good stuff. Got some more stuff brewing. Stay tuned. Peace.